Al-Mihna refers to a truly remarkable period in the history of Islam, where religious scholars faced persecution for not conforming to or agreeing to the false views that were held by the Abbasid rulers of that era. It was a period of great trial and test, where the religious elite were under immense pressure to submit to views that went against the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Mihna lasted for over a decade and was marked by the persecution and torture of scholars who refused to conform to the flawed, state-sponsored version of Islam. In this video we will explore part 1 of the notorious Mihna, examining its profound consequences and the remarkable stance taken by Ahmed ibn Hanbal. However, as always, if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to the History of the Ummah channel to learn more about important events within Islamic history. Also, please leave a comment as this would help us on the YouTube algorithm. Jazakallahu khairan. Before we start, the events of the Mihna were incredibly intense and emotional. To read about the details and descriptions of the suffering that was inflicted upon such a great scholar of Islam was shocking. But these are the heroes of Islam who would shape the trajectory of future generations and act as a role model for eras in the future who are bound to face similar struggles. Because history always repeats itself, the faces might change and there might be subtle variability, but it is always a battle between truth and falsehood. But the truth will always prevail, despite facing periods of darkness where the truth is suppressed. So what is the actual definition of Mihna? In the literal sense, Mihna means trial or test. But within the historical context, it refers to a series of events that occurred during the 9th century. The Mihna is also sometimes referred to as the Inquisition. The Mihna started off during the reign of the Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who was a follower of the Mutazillite school of thought, and he sought to enforce those views as the official doctrine of the state. Al-Ma'mun wanted the scholars of his era to say that the Quran was created, and went to great effort to try to force these scholars to endorse those views. Of course, there were some who were unable to endure the sinister threats from those in power, and they submitted. But more importantly, and sadly, they were in fewer numbers. There were those who were fierce and strong in resisting these threats and refusing to compromise on the basic principles of Islam, and one of those was Ahmed ibn Hanbal. So how did the Mihna begin? To start off with, let's provide some context to make the rest of the video easier to follow. Here is a list of the Abbasid rulers who were involved in the Mihna. Number 1 was Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who reigned between 813 to 833, and as mentioned, he initiated the Mihna. But after him, we had Caliph Al-Mu'tasim, who reigned between 833 to 842. Al-Mu'tasim continued the Mihna and intensified its severity. Then we had Caliph Al-Wathiq, who reigned between 842 to 847. Al-Wathiq eased the severity of the Mihna, but still enforced the doctrine. And finally, we had Al-Mutawakkil, who reigned between 847 to 861. Al-Mutawakkil abolished the Mihna and returned to the orthodox understanding of the Quran. So now we know which rulers were involved, let's get back to the story of the Mihna. After Al-Ma'mun decided to impose the Mihna upon the masses, he sent a letter from Al-Raqqa to the chief of the Baghdad police, Ishaq ibn Ibrahim, telling him to test the community, and where better to start than with the scholars of that era. Scholars are respected individuals, and perhaps he knew that if he was able to get the scholars under his wing, he would be able to convince the masses of his false ideas. On this tense situation, Ahmad ibn Hanbal reportedly said, "When they took us in to be questioned by Ishaq ibn Ibrahim, the first thing they did was to read aloud the letter written by the one in Tarsus, that is Al-Ma'mun. They recited some verses to us, including, 'Nothing is like him,' and 'He is the creator of everything.' When I heard, 'Nothing is like him,' I recited, 'He is the one who hears and sees.'" But the police were not interested in debating the subject. They informed the scholars who were there that if they do not accept the false creed of the Mutazilla, then they would face consequences. From everyone who was there, only 4 rejected. Their names were Muhammad ibn Nuh, Ubaydullah ibn Umar al-Qawariri, Al-Hasan ibn Hamad, and of course, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. However, shortly after, Ubaydullah ibn Umar and Al-Hasan ibn Hamad gave in too, leaving only Muhammad ibn Nuh and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the only 2 standing firm upon the truth. There they stayed until several days later, a letter arrived from Tarsus, ordering the 2 of them to be transported there. They were duly sent, shackled, one to the other. Imagine the scenario. You have been summoned by the chief police officer, alongside your peers, under the order of the powerful ruler. The powerful ruler expects your approval of his policies, even though you know that it completely goes against Islam. Your friends are submitting to him and affirming falsehood, even though they might not believe it inside their hearts, but they are scared. And whilst witnessing all of this, you are feeling the pressure to submit. That was the situation that Ahmad ibn Hanbal was in. Even for the giants of Islamic history, that was a huge ordeal to go through. It was reported at the time by a man called Abu Ma'mar al-Qati'i, who said, "I was there when Ahmad ibn Hanbal was brought to the palace during the Inquisition. He had always been a meek man, but when he saw the members of the community giving their assent, his veins swelled, his eyes went red, and all the meekness was gone. Seeing him, I remember thinking to myself, he's standing up for Allah." He was indeed standing up for the Lord of all of the worlds, and he continued to remain loyal to the true, authentic message of Islam. When someone said to Ahmad ibn Hanbal regarding this test, "Right loses and wrong wins," but Ahmad ibn Hanbal's heart remained firm, and he retorted, "Never. Wrong wins only if people's hearts wander off and lose their way, but ours haven't done that yet. That is an important lesson for the believers, and it also shows the conviction that Ahmad ibn Hanbal had in true Islam prevailing. So what happened next? It was only Ahmad ibn Hanbal and one other man, Muhammad ibn Nuh, who refused to submit to falsehood, and so they were chained up and carried away to prison. Ahmad ibn Hanbal had been placed into a very difficult but unique position. There was a lot at stake, and his response to this trial would be very crucial. Ahmad ibn Hanbal knew this himself, and so did others around him who were watching these events. A man who lived during that time, Abu Ja'far al-Ambari, said, "When I found out that Ahmad ibn Hanbal was being taken to see Al-Ma'mun, I crossed the Euphrates and found Ahmad sitting. When I greeted him, he said, 'Abu Ja'far, you shouldn't have troubled yourself.' It was no trouble, I told him. Then I said, 'Listen here. As of today, you have people prepared to follow your example. If you say the Quran is created, many of them will say the same. If you resist, many of them will too. Think about it. Even if that man doesn't kill you, you're going to die sooner or later anyway. So fear Allah and don't give in.'" When learning about the great trials that a giant of Islam endured, it is reassuring to know that he had supporters and other believers to send reminders to him. And one of those companions of his was his companion who resisted, Muhammad ibn Nuh. But sadly, his life had been destined to come to an end. Ahmad ibn Hanbal spoke highly of Muhammad ibn Nuh, saying, "I never saw anyone so young or so unlearned stand up for Allah more bravely than Muhammad ibn Nuh. I hope Allah saved him when he died." Ahmad ibn Hanbal goes on to say, "One day, when the two of us were alone, he said to me, 'Ahmad, fear Allah, we're nothing alike, you and I. You're a man people follow, and everyone is watching and waiting to see what you'll do. Fear Allah and stand firm.'" Reflecting on what he told him, Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, "Imagine him trying to keep me strong and warn me to do the right thing. And look what happened to him. He fell sick and ended up dying by the side of a road somewhere. I prayed over him and buried him." How devastating it must have been to lose your ally and companion during the darkest of times. But Ahmad ibn Hanbal persisted in his defiance. The other thing that is very interesting with his words is that he referred to Muhammad ibn Nuh as unlearned. This could mean that he wasn't very educated or knowledgeable about Islam. Allah knows best. But what is interesting about this encounter was that despite having little knowledge, Muhammad ibn Nuh had strong faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a good example for us that we don't need to be scholars to stand up for and defend Islam. During the Mihna, there were men of knowledge, the scholars, who were speaking falsehood to please Al-Ma'mun. And here was a man who was not a scholar, but he demonstrated great bravery and loyalty to the true message of Islam. Something to reflect on. So Ahmed ibn Hanbal and his companion, Muhammad ibn Nuh, were being sent in chains to Iraq. But as mentioned, Ibn Nuh died during the journey. Another important person who died whilst they were on their travels was the very man who enforced the Mihna, and that was the Caliph Al-Ma'mun. He died during the year 833 Common Era, which meant that Ahmad ibn Hanbal did not get to meet Al-Ma'mun in person. So what happened after the death of Al-Ma'mun? Ahmad ibn Hanbal was in Al-Raqqa when Al-Ma'mun died. Whilst he was there, a hadith scholar and a few others visited him. Whilst they were there, they confronted him with the reports that allow a Muslim to conceal his beliefs when his life is in danger. But what do you do, responded Ahmad, with Khabbab's report that says, before your time, there were believers who could be sawed in half without renouncing their faith. When they heard that, they gave up hope. I don't care if they keep me locked up, he went on. My house is already a prison. I don't care if they kill me by the sword either. The only thing I'm afraid of is being flogged. What if I can't take it? One of the prisoners had overheard him. Don't worry, Ahmed, he said. After 2 lashes, you don't feel the rest. After that, he was brought back from Al-Raqqa and jailed again, but this time in Baghdad. While in prison, some scholars arrived, bringing him evidence that he could conceal his beliefs. But being as knowledgeable as he was, Ahmad ibn Hanbal combated their evidence with reminders of other believers who had endured a greater ordeal than he had at that point. This demonstrates how having knowledge of the trials of previous generations can serve us well when it comes to our own trials. It can provide us with comfort and some solace, knowing that we are not alone in experiencing what we experience. In the same way we learn about Islamic history to inform our own practice and how previous generations practiced Islam, Ahmad ibn Hanbal himself was aware of the suffering of believers of the past, and this provided guidance for him on how to act during his own trials. When Ahmad ibn Hanbal was finally brought to Baghdad, there had been a new caliph in charge, and this new caliph was Al-Mu'tasim. He continued the Mihna, so continued to test people with false views. Whilst there, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was moved from prison to the house of Ishaq ibn Ibrahim, the head of the police that we mentioned earlier. Here, he encountered 2 men sent by the Caliph himself to test his beliefs and engage in debates. These 2 men would debate him about the creation of the Quran. And when they were ready to leave, they would call for a chain, and they would add it to the already existing chains that they had on Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Ahmad ibn Hanbal would say, I ended up with 4 chains on my legs. But these were just his legs. Allahu A'lam how many chains he had on his entire body, however. On the 3rd day in Ishaq ibn Ibrahim's house, one of the 2 came and started debating with him. During the debate, Ahmad ibn Hanbal asked, What do you say about Allah's knowledge? The man would reply with, Allah's knowledge is created, astaghfirullah. When Ahmad ibn Hanbal heard his blasphemous statement, he declared him as a disbeliever. The bravery and courage of Ahmad ibn Hanbal is astounding. He was being threatened with torture and execution, but he did not submit to the corrupt beliefs of the Mutazilla Caliphs and their followers. On the fourth night of Ahmad ibn Hanbal's stay, Al-Mu'tasim dispatched a man called Bugha, known as the Elder, to retrieve the resilient scholar from Ishaq's residence. On the way out, Ishaq ibn Ibrahim said to him, "By Allah, Ahmad, it's your life we're talking about here. He won't behead you and be done with it. He's sworn that if you don't do as he asks, he'll flog you senseless and then throw you where you'll never see the sun." Then he tried to trick him to say the Quran was created. Ishaq carries on by saying, "Now look here, doesn't Allah say we have made it an Arabic Quran? How could he make it without creating it?" But Ahmad ibn Hanbal refused to submit. They then took him to Al-Mu'tasim's palace and put him inside a room and locked the door. During the journey, they brought a riding animal and forcefully seated him on it, including all the chains that they had put on him from before. Ahmad ibn Hanbal would say, "More than once I nearly fell over with the weight of the chains." Ahmad ibn Hanbal would say, "They took me inside Al-Mu'tasim's palace, that is, put me in a room and locked the door. I wanted to clean myself off for prayer, but it was the middle of the night and there was no lamp in the room. But when I stuck out my hand, I found a pitcher of water and a basin nearby, so I did my ablutions and prayed." He then goes on to say, "The next morning, I pulled the drawstring out of my trousers and used it to tie the chains together so I could lift them, leaving my trousers hanging down on one side. Then Al-Mu'tasim's messenger came, took me by the arm, and took me to come along. So I appeared before Al-Mu'tasim, holding up my chains with the cord. Before moving on, there are a few things to note. Ahmad ibn Hanbal had been placed in a dire situation. He was shackled, which restricted his movement enormously, but despite this, he did not fail to establish his salah, which emphasizes what a magnificent man he had been and how much iman he had. Going back to the timeline of events, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was summoned in front of the Caliph Al-Mu'tasim and Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad, the chief judge and prosecutor of the Mutazilla. Ahmad ibn Hanbal was given a seat in front of the Caliph. Then, Al-Mu'tasim commanded his associates to debate with Ahmad ibn Hanbal, hoping that they would be able to overcome the truth with their false speech. They engaged in a back-and-forth debate, but Ahmad ibn Hanbal was knowledgeable enough to combat and refute every statement that they came to him with. Ahmad ibn Hanbal said, "And so it went. One of them would say something, and I would rebut him. Then another would speak, and I would rebut him too. Whenever one of his men was stuck, Ibn Abi Du'ad would interrupt. 'Commander of the faithful, by Allah he is misguided and misleading and a heretical innovator.'" How very interesting. This is a common tactic that the ignorant use when they have nothing intelligent to say. Since they have no evidence to rebut someone, they will turn to character assassination, as they did with Ahmad ibn Hanbal. It's worth noting that Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad had been the harshest among the Caliph's inner circle, and has even been accused of being the brains behind the Mihna. Ibn Jawzi said of him, "It had been Ahmad ibn Abi Du'ad who had persuaded the Caliph to test people's belief that the Quran is created." But Al-Mu'tasim kept saying, "Talk to him, debate him." So again, one of them would debate Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but again he would be defeated in the debate and fall short. When none of them had anything to say, Al-Mu'tasim would demand Ahmad ibn Hanbal to initiate a debate, commanding, "Come on, Ahmad, speak up." But Ahmad ibn Hanbal would reply, "Commander of the Faithful, give me something I can agree to, something from the Book of Allah or the Sunnah of His Messenger." At that, Ibn Abi Du'ad exclaimed, "What? You only repeat what's in the Quran or the Sunnah of His Messenger?" What a strange statement. Ibn Abi Du'ad seemed shocked that Ahmad ibn Hanbal was only using evidence from the Quran and Sunnah. It almost feels like an admission on their behalf that their views have been adopted from something other than the Quran and Sunnah. The interrogation continued, but now they started to threaten Ahmad ibn Hanbal and make offers to him, which of course he declined. Al-Mu'tasim said, "If he tells me what I want to hear, I swear I'll enchain him with my own hands. Then I'll lead my troops to him and march along beside him." And then he reminded Ahmad ibn Hanbal of the potential consequences of not submitting. Eventually, Al-Mu'tasim lost his patience, warning Ahmad ibn Hanbal of a similar fate to another pious Imam, informing him, "Did you know Salih al-Rashidi? He was my tutor, and he was sitting right there," he said, pointing to a corner of the room. "But I asked him about the Quran, and he contradicted me, so I had him trampled and dragged out. So Ahmad, find something, anything you can agree to, and I'll unchain you with my own hands." Of course, Ahmad ibn Hanbal did not submit. The session ended, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal was sent back to his prison cell. What happened over the next few days was that Al-Mu'tasim kept on sending his associates such as Ibn Abi Du'ad and others to continue to debate with Ahmad ibn Hanbal. When they did not hear what they wanted to hear, they would threaten him again with beatings. This cycle continued. It was a blessing that Ahmad ibn Hanbal had the Quran, his daily prayers, and his knowledge of his pious predecessors to keep him strong and guide him. Furthermore, he was making an impact on other people's lives and winning some supporters. For example, Ahmad ibn Hanbal's son Abdullah mentions other people arrested for following Ahmad ibn Hanbal's example, stating, "Al-Fath ibn Shahraf wrote to me in his own hand regarding a man of learning from Khurasan, that he and some of his fellow victims of the Inquisition were kept in confinement in a house somewhere. Going back to the events at hand, after his encounter with Al-Mu'tasim, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was once again sent back to prison, full of other prisoners. During night time, Ahmad ibn Hanbal felt worried about what was coming his way the next morning. Then suddenly, a very tall man from amongst the prisoners appeared from within the darkness and made his way to Ahmad ibn Hanbal. "Are you Ahmad ibn Hanbal?" he asked. But Ahmad ibn Hanbal did not respond. He would ask Ahmad ibn Hanbal again, "Are you Ahmad ibn Hanbal?" But again Ahmad ibn Hanbal ignored. But when he asked him for the third time, Ahmad ibn Hanbal confirmed that he was. The tall man would turn out to be one of his supporters, informing him, "Only endure, and the garden is yours." Later, when Ahmad ibn Hanbal felt the burning of the whips, he would remember this very profound statement.